Ventures. We're a thesis-driven venture firm investing in AI, and we're trying something new with this format. We are moving office hours virtual, which means you can join us from anywhere. We've had more than 700 people register for this, so welcome. We're thrilled that you're here. We're having a 15-minute conversation today, and we will be weaving in questions from the audience live. So please do ask questions within the chat. We will be monitoring that. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Lena Waters. She's a marketing leader behind some of the most iconic companies in software. She spent more than 2 decades building and scaling marketing organizations, from DocuSign through its IPO to Grammarly, and most recently at Notion. I think what makes her perspective especially relevant now is she's a true practitioner, and she has some very sharp perspectives that we debated over dinner. Lena, thanks for joining us. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Great to see you, Tom. Thanks so much for having me.
So at a recent dinner with a bunch of other CMOs, you said something that really stuck with me, which is what we're calling AI transformation is really just debt repayment. Can you unpack that for us? What did you mean?
Yeah, and I don't mean this to be overly critical. I think the adoption of AI that go-to-market professionals are doing is really incredible to see. But what I see so far is that most companies are agentically connecting these go-to-market processes that have been historically broken, and they probably should have been fixed years ago. So removing human coordination overhead and calling it transformation is kind of where we are today. And I sort of characterize that as debt repayment. It's real value, but it's not a new paradigm. So I think the tell is going to be whether growth is actually accelerating. And for most companies, it isn't yet. I also think it's sort of telling that we've renamed this same cycle 3 times. We used to say Gen AI 3 years ago, you remember? And then all of a sudden it became AI, and now everyone's saying agentic, and we're sort of treating these rebrands as progress. I don't think the underlying business impact has necessarily kept pace. So I'm really optimistic about the future, but I think that the current agentic processes replacing human processes is not necessarily transformational yet.
Got it. And so do you think, so someone was asking me yesterday, how do you know an organization is now undergoing AI? And I said headcount is flat. Like, you're growing really fast and headcount within the department is flat. Is that the way that you see it when you talk about like repaying debt? You can do the same, or you can do more with the same size team?
Well, I mean, there's some big brands that we all know of that have done some pretty dramatic, 30, 40% headcount decreases and sort of called it progress. And, you could be critical of that and say that that is sort of AI washing. You could say that that is debt repayment from, over hiring years ago. So I think flat is probably a good baseline. I do think that if you're reducing headcount and calling that progress by replacing those people and processes agentically, you should probably look at that and go, well, why wouldn't you just keep all those people that you spent so much time and resources hiring and arm them with AI, and then figure out how to grow even faster? So I think we're all obsessed a little bit with this, what are current costs and what are we getting out of it, as opposed to just saying, let's just use this moment to throw everything we can at it and grow as fast as possible.
Okay. So I love that perspective. So what does this mean within a marketing organization, right? We've had this historic debt. We are starting to work through that tech debt, and now we can really use agents in a great way to create advertising campaigns. We can figure out product marketing. We can listen to sales calls and customer success calls and really get a total view of the customer. How do we move from debt repayment to the next phase where we're really driving a ton of productivity?
Yeah, I think these efficiency gains are sort of real, but they're equalizing really fast, right? So if everyone has access to the same tools, then this productivity delta kind of disappears, and then you're back to zero differentiation.
Yeah.
So I think this harder question that everyone should be asking is, let's say everything that you're doing right now transformationally with AI works exactly as planned. What's actually different about your business in 3 years? So if the honest answer is like, we do the same thing faster with fewer people, then that's a margin play. That's not a strategy. So I think the bolder move is to sort of, keep those people, arm them with AI, go after more growth, and then look at it that way. I think there's more that we talked about over dinner in terms of, how does this upend the entire go-to-market process and the whole customer buying journey as well.
Yes. Okay. So let's talk about that, right? So, I remember this point. You called the website a brochure, right? And it's just like dying, it's a dying thing. Maybe it's a dying thing. I was at a conference at Human X earlier this week, and the CEO from Carta was saying, we are no longer investing in our website or our mobile app. We are just investing in the MCP or the agentic systems.
Yeah.
And if that's true, right? If both things are true, if like the website is a brochure and
Yeah.
it no longer makes sense to invest in a website, it just makes sense to invest in an MCP, all of a sudden the buyer journey looks really different.
It looks really different. Okay, so I think there's kind of three parts of this. So tactically, let me tackle the website first, because I mean, it might seem tactical, but it is emotionally important to, to all of us from a go-to-market perspective. Websites are human artifacts. They're brochures. They exist to communicate, persuade, convert people who navigate to them. And agents don't navigate. I mean, just think about how much time our organizations have spent collectively debating what goes in the top nav, like solutions
Right.
comes before
Yeah.
products. Like, are we allowed to call ourselves a platform? The dropdown has too many items. I mean, we've spent countless hours here, and but what that really is it's applied human psychology. It's an information hierarchy designed for people scanning, processing, feeling. Agents don't care about any of that. And so the replacement isn't a better website. It's a fundamentally different information architecture, which speaks to what you're talking about, which is, hey, we just want to look at this entirely different. So where's the world where information is structured, machine readable, API accessible, and that represents what your company does, who it serves, why it's credible. We don't have a name for that. And you mentioned a company who's doing that. Really, almost no one is building that yet. So if you take the website and now you sort of back up and you expand beyond that, and then you start to say, okay, well, what happens when you take an agent first view of the world? The entire internet was built for humans. SEO, funnels, brand storytelling, conversion design, PLG onboarding flows, all of that assumes that a human is browsing and feeling and being influenced. And agents don't need any of that. They're going to operate on parameters and programmatic signals. So the architecture that has driven all of our B2B and really consumer growth as well for the last 20 years is kind of becoming increasingly irrelevant, and no one's really building what replaces it. That's not a future problem. That structural fragility is already here. So third, move on to like the actual buyer journey. What happens when that buyer journey is done by an agent? So two things are going to happen. You're going to have a decision-making process that is actually ultimately owned by a human, but you're going to have agents doing a lot of the work. So think about like the Bain and Google research, which said people arrive with three incumbents and they're going to probably choose one of them. They have like a day one consideration set. And Serious Decisions talking about how buyers arrive like 60 to 80% through their journey before they actually talk to anybody at the company. So agents potentially blow that up. The
So do you,
fact is
do you,
that
so
that
do you
shape
think does it
are
go to
gone.
like 95 or 100%? I mean, do you think, are there certain, so in the consumer landscape, I'm willing to trust ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude on a pair
Mhm.
of shoes, right? I'm
Yeah,
probably willing to trust it on a laptop.
yeah.
So that's like, I'm going from $100 to $2,000.
Mhm.
And candidly, like probably a car,
Yeah,
right? I would buy a car based on the recommendations
yeah.
of ChatGPT. So I'm in like the 20K plus range. Is that the same within the enterprise? Like, do you think $20,000 pieces of software will be bought on AI recommendations, or is it a PLG enterprise difference?
I think that you can argue it's a dollar factor. I think you could argue like what the stakes are, right? If you buy a car and you make a bad decision, you're kind of kicking yourself about it, but like it's just you. If you make a bad
Right.
decision at work and you recommend the wrong technology solution, you're probably going to get fired. So
Right.
there's a like stakes level here of what actually happens. And I guess what I'm saying too is that we talk about agents replacing things and we're very sort of binary about it. I think what's
Mhm.
going to happen is you're going to have a human-based decision-making framework because a human still has to accept liability for a decision.
Yeah.
But all the work that's gone into that um, is going to be done by an agent. So then it comes back to the human again at the end, who then is going to say, what does human decision making look like when humans are no longer doing the work that precedes the decision? So that reshapes what does the buying committee look like? Who's sales selling to? How long does the back half of a sales deal really take? So that accountability gap that you're talking about, it's not just philosophical, it's sort of this structural constraint where we're going to say a human's going to program an agent, it's going to go out and do some work, it's going to come back with a recommendation. But that recommendation now needs to make its way back to humans,
Hmm.
because the human has to accept the liability for that.
So, okay, in that we have a question from the audience on this topic. In that world, what is the like bare minimum that marketers in this era should be thinking about? Should they be thinking about uh, AI SEO? Should they be thinking about changing their website to be agent first? Like, are we at that stage already?
I think there's like sort of a dual reality that has to happen. I don't think that anything that humans are doing today can actually go away, and
Hmm.
we can just wipe the slate clean and say, oh, you no longer have to worry about these things. Like SEO actually matters. It's taken a lot of heat these days, but a lot of people are still going to type stuff into Google search. At the same time, people need to be building this future sort of legibility for what does it mean for your business to become legible to an agent, and how are we working on that? And I think something like AEO is sort of scraping the surface for that. It's still kind of operating on an old world logic. AEO is sort of SEO with an agent in the loop,
Hmm.
as opposed to the flip side of that, right? You're still sort of saying like you should be cited by AI models in Reddit and G2 presence. But in order to be cited, like you have to be present. And so it's this weird sort of like closed loop of, well, which one is it? So it's evolutionary, but it's just not really transformational. So I think the answer to that question is you have to do exactly what you're doing now, do it as efficiently as you can. And you have to start building for this parallel universe where you assume an agent is going to need to understand that you exist. So you have to be like machine readable. You have to be
Hmm.
legible to the agent. And then I mean, this goes on, right? The three parts I really think about are you have to be legible, you're going to have to be credible, which is a whole different thing, and then you're also going to have to be accessible, which is where you kind of get into the PLG part. Like, our agent's going to be doing the onboarding in your product when you think about that self-serve experience that you mentioned.
Totally. I mean, one of the things that we're seeing within startups is buying committees are now much different than they were even 6 months ago, where you have, let's say you have a head of marketing, you might have a head of legal, a head of AI,
Mhm.
and then maybe 6 months from now, you actually have an agent as a buying committee of four. The agent is actually doing the research, and then the buying committee is consuming that research, researching a bit on their own, maybe running a POC, proof of concept, or whatever. And so
Mhm.
you have this like non-human constituent that's clearly will be very important in these kinds of considered decisions.
Mhm.
And you have to equip just as much as the marketing teams and the sales teams of vendors were equipping their internal champions. Well, now the agent needs to be on your side and you need to
Yeah.
influence that key stakeholder, right? That's so different than it was a year ago.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's totally right. And I think, this is where I'm sort of against this conversation of the agents replacing the human piece. I think it's not replacing, I think it's doubling. You have to
Because there's
be,
this whole new persona. So you have two
yeah,
now parallel tracks and
yeah,
there's a buyer journey for both.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you have, let's say, legal or procurement, they have to be convinced as humans that this is the right decision. But they're also going to create agents to go out and do research. And those agents have to be convinced because they're going to come back and do it. So, what happens if every member of the buying team is running their own agents, which is exactly what you see happening, in businesses. Different departments build their own agents to do their own research. And there isn't really any kind of ecosystem for those agents to collaborate and talk to each other. So I think we're going to make our lives a little bit harder and more complicated before it's going to get easier.
Yeah. Okay. So Andy asked on that point, Andy asked a question. Do you think agentic AI impacts behavioral economics? Do people change their behavior as a result of all this? Do you think like AIs could be a great salesperson and so the buying journey ultimately changes, or are we just doing the whole process faster?
Well, you could argue that it's faster because that's our current experience. Hey, I used to do this thing and now I can get an agent to do it, so it's faster. And so that's the
Mhm.
first visceral feel that you have. But if we're actually talking about sort of like the human behavior of it, um, people may do their work differently. They may make their decisions differently, but I would say at the end of the day, like, the humans still carry the liability,
Right. That's
right?
what it all comes down to.
Yeah,
Somebody needs to own that decision, and the
right.
research can be faster.
The research can be faster, et cetera. And but at the end of the day, like, you're not going to outsource everything to an agent. Like, you can't sue an agent,
I know.
right?
That's
Not, or
it's
not
not
yet.
a legal entity like a corporation.
It's not. It's not. Sidebar. Everybody should watch that movie, The Corporation, because it's kind of prescient. about, like an agent is not going to have the same sort of legal standing the way a corporation does. You think about, like, boards or procurement policy or, fiscal responsibility, like none of those structures are going away. So humans are going to be legally required to keep decision-making authority, regardless of how much of this cognitive work that agents do. So I think it's a really good question. Are people going to change their behaviors? Yeah, you can't put a new variable into the ecosystem and not have it create some sort of ripple effects, right? But the trees like the trees definitely falling in the forest and it's making a sound, like that is happening. But I think the real question is, like, what does human decision making look like when humans aren't doing the work that precedes that decision? Now all of those humans not only have to program the agent, create the agent, now they have to consume everything that the agent told them. And so we've got legibility, right? Like, I can be readable by an agent. The agent can go out and find information. I can digest it and understand it. Now you have this additional credibility problem. Before, I had to understand what my team was coming to me and telling me, hey, you asked us about this thing. Here are 3 recommendations. Here's our decision making structure. Well, do you have that same level of trust with the agent, right? What's that external corroboration for that output credibility? Can the agent construct a recommendation that maps back to your ask? And does that accountable executive have enough context to defend that decision internally? You can't go to your board and say, well, my agent told me that we should do this thing, so I think we should do this thing. You now have to digest all of that and understand it. And what happens if the agent hallucinated? So we're not quite there yet. And if you can't interrogate that recommendation, that's more dangerous than no recommendation at all. So it's a product design problem for whoever's building the agent, but that's also it's not really a marketing problem anymore. Agent credibility, that's now between the agent and the human. So we've introduced a whole different dynamic.
So last question. Given all of this, right? I mean, we've talked about the changing buyer journey. We've talked about like debt repayment. We've talked about how agents are now part of the buying committee. If you were to build a marketing organization today from the ground up, how would you do it?
Yeah. So I think the honest answer is that nobody's fully built this yet. So this is entirely theoretical, right? I think the closest version actually exists in probably small AI native startups where the founding team is sort of spanning product engineering, go to market without any kind of functional separation. It's just that nobody's really done this at scale. So I think, one, I would say, I don't think this is necessarily how would we just structure marketing or go to market. I think does this become the catalyst that helps us break down the schism that exists within a company today, as we all know about it. There's product and engineering, which build a product and then kind of put it out there and go, this is a fantastic product. It should sell. And then go to market kind of has to come in and make something of it. I think if we don't allow this new paradigm to break down that barrier, like once and for all, and really start to make that more fluid, I don't think this thing is going to work. I think if we just say, how are we going to rebuild marketing or how are we going to rebuild go to market, we're just back in the same silos that we always were in. To be really specific, though, about marketing, I do think you're going to need fewer people with higher leverage that are more generalized, and they're going to be organized around outcomes. So do you have a content team? Do you have a demand gen team in the traditional sense, or are those just task-based structures?
So on that point, we have a question from Justin. What happens to the role of brand in an agentic world?
Well, is brand going to matter to an agent?
I don't think so. There's no emotional connection between two Claudes.
I mean, if you think about day one consideration set, right? I think about a category. I think about a problem that category solves. I have 3 brands that are top of mind that I think are the incumbents for this situation, and that is largely informed by brand. That's the no one gets fired for buying IBM.
Mm-hmm.
Is an agent going to care about that? And part of the opportunity, I think, for emerging companies is, if this is all true, everybody has an equal shot based on the quality of their product. Brand is still always going to be important for humans, and humans are still going to own that decision. So that doesn't go away. It's still important for humans. And all the conversation that we're having about taste and judgment and relationships, that's still all super important. So that doesn't go away for humans. I think we have to think about a world, though, going back to the legibility, being legible to agents, where what happens if brand matters 0% to an agent? How do you think about what you're presenting then? And is it an entirely 100% logical argument that is then augmented by a brand influenced human decision making buying team?
Yeah. Lena, we're at time, but this has been a phenomenal conversation. I think the thing that I really took away from the conversation is we have to reimagine the way that we are organizing ourselves. This is one of the most exciting parts about AI. We've structured organizations in the way that we have with all these different silos, and now the workflows are all completely being reinvented. The expectations that we have for ourselves and each other is exploding, and then the buying journey is now going to have agents involved. And anyway, it was wonderful to hear all of your perspectives, and we're really grateful you could join us on Office Hours today.
Really excited for what's ahead. Thanks so much for having me, Tom.
Thank you.